Zhao, and we are Table 5's a grant proposal team, and our grant proposal is called Lead Exposure Study Proposal. And our problem statement is lead poisoning is an urgent issue for the health of our communities. A study will be conducted through the Lead Exposure Elimination Project to support lobbying against polluting corporations and lobbying for increased environmental regulations. So, our overall overview, our main purpose is to gather data on environmental surveys and lead poisoning statistics to find a correlation between different geographic regions, as well as their respective industries, in the development of lead poisoning or cognitive decline. We'll be doing soil samples, surveys, water testing, surveillance on lead poisoning for local hospitals, and psychological testing on the populations around areas of interest. We hope to unveil the true data on the distribution of lead poisoning around certain corporations. The importance of lead poisoning's effect on population psych will also be unveiled in these studies. If we're not able to gather and share this information, thousands, if not millions of people will suffer over many decades, and the overall health and mental health standards will fall immeasurably over the next 40 years. Thus, we need funding for things like soil sample testing, water sample testing, and gaining permission, enter and test around certain corporations. Then we need to be able to access the important laboratories that can process their data and thus provide statistically significant correlation results. Next off, with our testing revealed to the public and the data fully realized through our information campaigns, we're able to provoke movement to stop lead contamination, reduce illegal dumping by manufacturing companies, and promote awareness for legislature calling for stricter regulations on lead testing and manufacturing. So what is lead poisoning exactly? So lead poisoning is when lead binds to sulfhydryl groups, or basically organic compounds with SH in them, and then carboxyl groups, which are organic compounds with COOH on them, while randomly taking away or adding electrons to other molecules, turning them into free radicals. This creates massive biochemical effects on molecules such as lipids, DNA, and proteins. And the combined effect of these free radicals inhibit enzymatic production and activity, damage protein construction, destabilize cell membranes, and damage DNA, which causes mutations. Specifically to the binding of sulfhydryl groups and carboxyl groups, this starts to inhibit enzymes, because enzymes have proteins which have a lot of carboxyl and sulfhydryl groups. Larger physiological effects include the inhibition of the creation of hemoglobin, which inhibits basically oxygen transportation through blood to the majority of cells in the body, so that creates less energy that allows cells to not get oxygen, and thus they're not able to produce as much energy through their mitochondria as before the lead poisoning. It also inhibits the repair and even damages the myelin sheaths of neurons in the brain. So basically this affects all cognitive function, all memory, attention span, and it also has various other neurological effects like affecting motor movement and hand-eye coordination. This also probably affects a lot of cognitive ability to reason and basically retain information over a long period of time. It also completely destabilizes hormones, and then it also replaces calcium ions and hydroxyapatite molecules, and this replaces a lot of the calcium in bone, which decreases its overall structural integrity and density, and thus can create conditions like osteoporosis. So how is lead poisoning caused? So bioaccumulation of lead happens in many ways, but most of it is ions of lead leaching out of various objects that we use to store, cook, and wash things with. Furthermore, there may be lead in particulate matter that may make its way into the food. We might even breathe these particles in. The lead gets ionized within the body or outside the body through exposure. Since lead really does not want to be ionized, since it is extremely insoluble, it starts reacting with things to try and precipitate out and ends up completely destabilizing body systems. So here's some sources of lead, like lead pipes. You have the chimneys of factories, explosives, fertilizer and pesticides, the smelting of ores. You also have lead paint, which is a really big contaminant. So last but not least for my section, we have why do we need to stop lead poisoning? That's because it affects the neurons and overall critical thinking ability due to its ability to break down myelin sheaths. So that's really bad for our societies if our lawmakers, our politicians, and people they lead aren't sound of mind. The general health of the community is also at stake, and children will die younger, the elderly will die in pain, and the population will plummet due to infertility rates rising. All if we don't stop the lead contaminating the environment. And the main culprits of lead poisoning are these negligent manufacturers who want to cut costs and they add lead to their products like ceramics, glassware, and container making so that they can make like their glass more glossy or add like lead glazes to their pottery. There's also malicious manufacturers like chemical manufacturers of lead paint or heavy metal industries who dump lead byproducts directly into like various spots like in secret dumping grounds and national parks or into waterways, which is extremely bad for us because we drink all that water.
Hello, my name is Jonah, and I'll be talking about our project's goals, how we will try to accomplish those goals, and what the purpose of this project is. So, some of our goals are to spread awareness of lead poisoning to different communities so that they are aware of the causes as well as the effects of lead poisoning. Another goal is that we are trying to do research in the environmental impact of lead poisoning, such as lead in water and lead in the soil. Another goal is that we are trying to find ways to treat patients that are exposed to lead poisoning, such as trying to lower the chances of patients getting lead in their bloodstream or figuring out ways to how to prevent the symptoms from arising from lead poisoning given medication or other preventative measures. And our last goal is to have political lobbying against companies and corporations that have unethical ways of removing their lead. Not only does this benefit in giving better environmental practices, but it's also a better way to keep in check the waste products that can potentially harm the communities that either result from runoffs in the water that have lead in them, or from the soil in which they possibly will grow produce. So how will we reach these goals? So part of our objectives is to decrease patient lead exposure by 20%. And we have to decrease patient lead exposure so that not only and by decreasing it, we decrease either the symptoms that cause lead poisoning to be fatal or very bad, or B, we have preventative measures that decrease patient lead exposure in general, such as wearing masks, practicing hygienic practices, and preventative measures from getting lead into these certain areas. Another objective that we will try to achieve is to increase companies' and corporations' responsibility of disposing lead properly by lobbying for new laws that will prevent corporation companies from just recklessly throwing lead into the environment. And our third objective would be to have a report that details the research into lead poisoning, and such as the causes of lead poisoning, the effects of lead poisoning, the symptoms of lead poisoning, where is lead located, etc., etc. So why is our grant important? Our grant is important mostly because of the health of the community. Lead poisoning is, after all, a disease that could happen and could cause death. So it is important for the health of the community to understand what lead poisoning is and how to make preventative measures. It's also important to have more research into this, especially for the protection of children. Again, this goes back to the health of the community, but also more precisely how it affects children, because children under the age of 6 have very fragile nervous systems, and lead poisoning affects the nervous system of children if left untreated. And our third reason for why we want our grant is important is because it can prevent unnecessary spending of money. Due to not having enough preventative measures or not enough awareness, governments will have to spend money on trying to remove excess lead from certain areas, having to spend money on taking care of people that had lead poisoning. Well, what our grant is going to try to do is have research as well as showing that there are necessary steps that we can take to prevent the unnecessary spending of money later down the road. So it's better for long term.
Hello everyone, this is Jay here, and here we're trying to show you some example how to use of the education money that we're being provided to prevent lead poisoning, how to prevent future lead poisoning, and then the treatments that we have for lead poisoning. First, how do we remove or prevent lead poisoning? We can try to remove lead from home. For example, we can use that money to fund the lead paint removal. Since a lot of home the older ones, especially that's been built before 1978, that still have lead-based painting on their wall. Government can try to grant or help low-income families to safely remove the paint and to replace it. And then we can also try to replace the lead pipes, which is deeply in contact with our water source. And then those pipes might have already been infected by by the lead stones that is being built up in the pipes over time. And then we can try to expand testing and healthcare. What we can do is that give free uh, daily routine lead screening and to follow up on cares for kids who are in needed. And then we can also do the educate and empower communities, which we need to public awareness campaigns where the funds are being used to teach families how to avoid possible lead poisoning exposure. For example, we need clean water use, proper cleaning in methods, and then knowing the risk factors. And then what we can also do is that community outreach workers, we can hire those people. Those people are from affected areas who is trained to help others to understand uh, the lead risks and to how to get support. Next, we have the medication treatment. We have the oral or IV medications that includes the DMSA or EDTA. DMSA is a medication that is being used more frequently than EDTA, since EDTA is being used for infections um, um, and then patients who are more seriously infected. And then we can try to eat more nutritions like food that has nutrition like iron, calcium, vitamin C. And then we can also try to remove the source of exposure. Uh, for example, and then identify the actual source of the exposure. These places can be lead painting, dust, water, and soil, or toys. Also, we can try to clean home environment that especially the dusts that uh, most likely to have lead be contained in it. And then to relocate the child if the home can be made safely quickly enough. For example, the new home will probably have those very strong smells. Those are mostly lead uh, to mostly might have lead exposures. And then we can try to find professionals like pediatricians, the toxicologist, public health department, and environmental health experts. We can make more jobs like this or fund college students who are in this pathway in order to create more doctors like this and to prevent further more lead poisonings. And then here is the source that we have been doing our research on. And thank you very much for listening to our presentation.